Thank you guys so much for tuning in today. I am honored to be joined with Paula Steele with WellStone, which is a local facility we're going to talk a lot about today. But I'm just thrilled that you're here, so thank you so much for carving out time on this rainy day to make it over here.
Absolutely.
Paula has been someone who our professional circles have crossed recently, which I'm greatly appreciative about. We're not going to talk about that necessarily today, but you've been with WellStone for quite some time here in Huntsville.
Yes.
And WellStone is such a phenomenal mental health facility that is helping children and adults and all in between with services as a community health agency, community mental health agency, I should say, and just doing phenomenal things here in our community. So we're going to talk a little bit about her background. Shocker, military background a little bit and has moved around a bit. But I will say just a little disclaimer. I think this is probably the first one that we've given, but there may be some pretty sensitive topics that we talk about today that might be a little bit hard, regarding potentially suicide and trauma and things of that nature. I'm not going to go into specifics too much, but those topics will certainly be covered because that's the nature of the world that you live in, which takes a very special person to do that. So I'm really, really eager for this conversation to hear your story, but just wanted to let some folks know that we may talk about some of those things. So anyways, thank you so much for being here. I really, really do appreciate it. And let's just kind of start at the beginning. Like, I know a little bit about your background and what you've studied and where you're from and all of that, but let's kind of start there and then we'll sort of work our way up to where you are today.
Okay. Well, I really felt called into this career field, but it was kind of a bumps and hurdles along the way. My husband and I, who's retired military, he enlisted straight out of college, and then we were all over the place. So we went to college together. I got my undergraduate degree in psychology, and entered the field briefly, and then we were all over the world. So went back to get my master's in social work later in life. So I was a graduate with a newborn and 2 older kids, and my husband was deployed at the time, so trying to make all of that work and juggle all those responsibilities.
Did you sleep at all during that time frame, or was it very minimal?
I kept telling myself, you just got to get through this, and then you're good to go. But it was a
every
struggle.
day you've got that mantra going on.
Yes, but I think you really see how a group of women can come together and support each other during that time, and that is exactly what happened. All of the military spouses that were around me kind of like rallied and helped me get through that.
Yeah, it truly takes a tribe, right?
It does.
To support, and I've heard that a couple of times with just in the military community. My sister's part of the firefighter community with her husband, and it's very similar to that, where everybody just kind of rallies around each other. So what, if I can ask you a little bit about your beginning, what intrigued you initially to go into psychology, and then how did you make not the leap necessarily, but how did you determine that you wanted to pursue your master's in social work after traveling a bit?
So I was really fascinated with the way our brain works, and that's what led me into psychology in the beginning. And I had aspirations of going into direct practice, getting my doctorate in psychology, but I think life experience, because there was that break in time before I pursued my master's, and living all over the world in different cultures, meeting so many amazing people, but amazing people that had barriers they were facing, led me to social work, because social work looks at not just the individual, but every system that impacts the individual, that might keep them from being successful. And in today's world, there's so many different barriers that individuals face. So that felt more holistic to me.
Yeah. Did you get a lot of direct exposure from that from your husband being in the military? Or was that through personal family relationships, if I can ask? Or
I would say a little bit of both. I don't think that there is probably any family that mental health or substance use doesn't touch in some way. But the same with the military. There's trauma experienced by our military, active duty, and veterans, but also their families and their children. And I was part of our care team that would assist if a soldier was injured or killed when they were deployed. So it was really heavy and eye-opening, but also I think helped me to know that that was my path that I needed to go down.
Wow. I know we'll talk about this a little bit down the road, but you just kind of piqued my interest on something. From your experience, when you've seen trauma, especially within, someone who has served in the military, do you often find that, and I feel like this is a no-brainer question, but I'm curious, do you find that sort of trickle down into that family dynamic and potentially, create an environment where additional challenges within mental health become the reality,
Absolutely.
I mean, is that something that you've seen?
So when a service member comes back from a deployment, they have pretty much been on go. Their stress level is high. They're constantly in a state of fight or flight. And so it's hard to do that switch when you come back home and integrate with your family. And all of a sudden there's all these routines and there's all of these, events that you have to go to where, I can think of one time, my husband in particular came home and we had to go to an event, and it was in a gymnasium which echoed, and there were just people everywhere, and he was just constantly scanning, and really could not enjoy that time and could not calm himself enough to be in that kind of chaotic environment where it's so uncontrolled.
That's got to be so hard. And so the implications that has then on maybe your kids or just your family dynamic is that you guys are all kind of maybe reacting to that a little bit and kind of helping to shield some of that concern a bit.
There's so many different things. And when you think about the one spouse leaves and the other spouse is back trying to take care of the young kids or older kids, they're the ones that are making all the decisions. They've developed their own routine. And then suddenly you have the other spouse come back, and that can be a hard transition for the young person. Where all of a sudden now there's different rules or a different change in their routine, and it can really unsettle the whole family.
Yeah, I could see that. A lot of disruption, that you just have to adapt to and get used to, which is really hard. So flash forward, you complete your master's degree, which is amazing. Talk about a hustler, being able to do that while your husband is deployed and you've got little kids, and holy cow, just managing all that. What are some of the things that kind of kept you going in all of that? And I'd be curious, with the master's in social work at that time in your life, what were you wanting to achieve with that? What was your goal for that?
My end goal was always, I thought in my head, the military was my family. I wanted to work with the VA, work with soldiers, with their families. That was my experience. That was really where I thought I was being led. And it's funny how then you end up somewhere else and you realize, okay, maybe something else is in store.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Yeah.
So flash forward, you've been at WellStone since 2017.
Yeah.
And have overseen several huge initiatives while being there. Several, with the new building opening a couple of years ago, and then most recently the new pediatric unit, which is amazing. And for those that don't know, you guys received a grant a couple of years ago from Governor Ivey, right? One of the, was it 3 grants in the state to open its first community mental health facility? So talk a little bit about that and really were you there prior to and then during and after and got to see all of it come to fruition? Or were you part of that team when that announcement was already there? Or just talk a little bit about what that meant.
So I think WellStone was instrumental in bringing crisis services to Alabama. And Jeremy Blair, our CEO, has really worked so hard. So years and years before 2020, when those 3 crisis centers were awarded, he had worked diligently on that. But I did get to play a role. in the development of our request for program, RFP. So anyone that wanted to try to receive one of these crisis centers had to submit one. So I got to help with that. I got to help some with the building design.
That's fun.
But when we were awarded it, I had not been chosen as the director at that time. But I was bound and determined that that was going to be my program. I really just believed so much in what this could change for mental health. Just really be a transformative experience for individuals that had nowhere else to go besides the emergency room, or sometimes ending up in jail.
Yeah.
When they're in crisis. And the way we were approaching it was so holistic, looking at the whole person, which just aligned with the social work values. I just knew I needed to be a part of this.
Yeah, that's amazing. So for those that maybe don't know what a crisis center is compared to, not to be silly, but the emergency room, right?
Sure.
If someone is experiencing a true crisis, what is typically their course of action? And now that this crisis center is here, how has that changed that? And also too, I'd be curious, why now? What was the need? I mean, what has unfolded? And I know we can all make our own assumptions about this, right? But would love to hear it from you. I mean, why was Alabama and North Alabama primarily chosen for this specifically, and how has that really made such an impact with our community?
I think at the state level, when you're looking at the services available and access to care, there was not immediate access to care to mental health or substance use services. There was a long, drawn-out process to get, your initial appointment and then get in to see a psychiatrist. Or you would go to the emergency room where, mental health is important, and I can't take away from that. But if there's a trauma victim who comes in, or someone who's been in a car wreck, those individuals get prioritized. And so you might be sitting in the emergency room for a while before you're seen. And in Madison County in particular, we didn't really have a huge number of psychiatric beds available as compared to some of the other places in Alabama that really had a built-up system. So I think it was overall a recognition that we didn't have the right kind of services in place that people needed. Yeah. And after so many things were going on in our world, and over time, some services had been defunded, and then, different orientations of how we should provide services for mental health. But I think even at the national level, there was a recognition that mental health has got to be prioritized.
Yeah.
We have so many people dying from opioid overdose daily. It's just unreal.
I can't believe that it's still happening.
It is.
Like I just, you hear, obviously, that it doesn't come out of the news, but I feel like it's been, I don't know why, but when I think of an epidemic, I think of a short-term thing. And I feel like this has been going on for an extended period of time, which is just, it's just wild to me, and it's heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking.
It is, and I think oftentimes people don't realize that whatever recreational drug they're using may be laced with fentanyl or some other concoction until they end up in the hospital, or unfortunately they lose their life. So I think the crisis centers came about because we saw there was a gap, but also nationwide we needed a crisis system of care, which for everyone, best practices show we need someone to call, someone to respond, and somewhere to go. Okay. So that is our nationwide crisis system of care, of calling 988, having options for someone to respond, which best practices show is a mobile crisis team, and then having somewhere to go, which is a crisis center.
Okay. Is there a mobile crisis team here
we do.
As well?
We
wow,
do.
Let's talk a little bit about that.
Okay, so under WellStone Emergency Services, we have, of course, our adult crisis center and our pediatric crisis center, And then we have an adult mobile crisis team, which is a master level therapist and a care manager that respond to someone in crisis. For Huntsville, it's anywhere in Madison County. So if the crisis is at the gas station on the corner, that's where they go. If it's at Publix, they show up at Publix. It's just wherever that crisis is.
Yeah.
And they work in conjunction with our law enforcement, trying to stabilize individuals where they are, provide resources, or bring to the crisis center if that's the level of care that they need.
Wow.
So we also have a child and adolescent mobile crisis team that respond to young people who are in crisis, wherever they may be in Madison County.
Wow. So how many patients would you guys say that you're serving on an annual basis now, especially with the pediatric unit? I don't know if do you have those stats yet? I know it recently opened,
Sure.
but what are you guys thinking that will be?
So we moved into, on the adult side, we moved into our new building October of 2022.
Okay.
We were averaging around 40 admissions a month. Now we're up to between 150 and 170 admissions a month on the adult side. Our pediatric unit, we opened September 30th, and we've had over 50 admissions so far.
Wow, that's wild. That is wild. So I would love to talk a little bit about the pediatric side of it. As a mother of 3 kids, and I know you have kids as well, and you know, I've read so many articles on the mental health crisis and its association with technology and social media and all of the things. Yeah, it's just, it goes on and on and on. And it is really, really hard to kind of wrap your head around as a parent to know, like, what do you do? You know, like, how do you handle it? And it was crazy. I was just at a theater performance at my son's high school last night, and was speaking with a friend of his who talked. We somehow got, I know, it was in the program, and there was a recognition in the program that was about calling 988, and it was in honor of a student who, you know, took his own life years ago, and they still put it in this program to this day. And I didn't know what it was because I just didn't know. And so I was sitting there talking with her about it, and she's a young 16-year-old girl. And, you know, she opened up about just her own personal challenges with mental health. And you know, and I know that, and even speaking with my own kids, you know, it's a very common thing. And so I would just be curious to hear from your perspective, like, what sort of shift have you seen throughout your career? And not to make this doom and gloom, but like, where are we headed, you know, as it relates to this? And how can we as parents and as neighbors and as family, you know, kind of step in and play a role to help combat that? I mean, I know, and again, I know there's some of these things that you're not necessarily an expert in, right? But you've been exposed to so much and have been involved in this space for a long time. What's your kind of consensus of the whole thing? And I know that's a really big, loaded question.
Sure.
But
I think that we really have to pay attention to the impact of electronic screen time and social media on our young people. The Surgeon General even put out a warning about it. We're seeing kids who are ages 12 to 14, I think is the statistic. Second leading cause of death is suicide.
Yeah.
That, as a mom, that, you know, makes my stomach drop.
yeah, 100%.
Yeah. When I was a kid, a long time ago, when people were talking bad about you at school or someone was being bullied, it was like maybe on the bus ride there, between the hours of school and on the bus ride home. Now it's 24/7 because it's social media, it's text messaging, it's nonstop. And I think there is the problem that something that you would never say to someone face to face, it seems really easy to say it via text.
100%,
or,
yeah.
you know, where you're not making that eye contact with the person when you're saying this thing.
And it's amazing because I think even I've seen, you know, some of the things that like my son is doing, and you know, like you see what other kids are saying, and I'm like, would you ever say that to somebody's face? And it's like, well, no. And it's like, well, then why in the world would you think it's okay to say it over text? And to your point, there's no immediate penalty. There's no repercussions to that. You know what I'm saying? And it's just very dangerous area
Right.
to play in.
And I think one of the other challenges as a parent is technology is advancing so quickly.
Yeah.
And there's so many different apps that just pop up overnight that allow kids to hide them on their phone, or you know, they can even get, you take away a young person's phone, they can get another phone at school, no problem. So it's really hard to monitor. It's really hard to, I know for myself, a lot of times my 12-year-old shows me how to do something on my phone that I just can't grasp. So to think about trying to really monitor who they're meeting online, what experiences they're having, it's difficult.
Agreed. I will say, I think, I don't know if it's called a brick or a bark phone. It's one of the two. We've talked about it. We had Kristen Scroggins in with Gen Y Communications. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her, but she specializes in generational diversity.
Yes.
And I mean, I could listen to her talk all day long. She's fascinating, and she's hysterical to boot. But she talks a lot about that. And we had a big conversation about that. And, you know, as a parent looking back, right, like never in a million years would I put a smartphone in my kid's hand, ever. And, you know, and she made this really good point, which, you know, you hear, but, you know, sometimes hearing it in another setting just hits differently. But she said, you know, I am not here to be their best friend. I'm here to parent them and make sure that they are protected in all aspects until they turn 18 and they go decide to be an adult, you know. And I think, you know, we often, at least I also only speak for myself, but you kind of get guilted into certain things because you feel bad, right? That they won't fit in if they don't have this or they don't have that, you know. But oh my gosh, it's such a slippery slope in what that yields. That is so hard to monitor. My oldest daughter was telling me the same thing. She's like, look on his phone, he can hide it, so it might be looked like, you know, disguised as this or that. And I'm like, I would never even think to do that, you know, which is just wild. But so talk to us a little bit about, maybe you're sitting with a 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old girl, right? And are there particular signs that you would suggest to keep an eye out? Are there things that you guys are seeing from a WellStone perspective that not necessarily making a generalized consensus, but are trends that are new and frankly scary, you know, that you're seeing? What are some of those things that come to mind?
Self-harm, self-mutilation is very rampant. And a lot of times it's in places on the body that you would not normally see.
Yeah.
And I think also parents just don't realize exactly how much screen time people are having, their young people are having. There's ways to check. I don't think people just normally know to do that to see. And even knowing how to shut off all of the Wi-Fi in the house, or asking, like feeling empowered enough to meet the parents of other kids, or to ask your neighbor to not let your child on their Wi-Fi.
I wouldn't even
because
think
they
about
can get
that.
it in their room.
That's a really good point.
So there's a lot. I think there is too many individuals that are coming in that are feeling suicidal, and too many people don't realize that it's an okay conversation to have, and you need to practice. You need to be able to sit down with your child and say that word, suicidal.
Yeah.
Not, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Because that can mean many things. But are you planning to end your life? Are you thinking about suicide? I think many people feel you use that word and it puts the thought in their head. That's not true. I think it has to be an open space and a safe space to have those conversations and normalize talking about emotions.
Yeah, so important. Well, that way you can figure out how to handle them the right way. This is thanks to your colleague, Karen Peterson.
Yes.
Give her a shout out. She's amazing.
She is.
She, the last time we saw you, she couldn't stop talking about Rising Strong, the book that she's reading by Brene Brown. And I'm a huge Brene Brown fan. I mean, she's just amazing. Everything that comes out of her mouth is just liquid gold, in my
Yeah.
opinion. And I'm like, I wish I had you like in my ear when I was a kid. But she, she talks a lot about being able to, especially with your kids, to talk openly about emotion and how important it is to even use that word, use the descriptors, and letting kids know that it's okay to kind of share that I'm angry right now, or I'm sad about this, or whatever it might be. Because there's so many benefits as to why, but one of the big ones is that way you can have coping mechanisms you can figure out, the way you can handle a situation and be able to contain it a little bit, But I think you're so right. I mean, you've got to have that dialogue with your kids, which is just so critical.
It is, and I always say I wish in school that was one of the curriculum, is learning those coping skills, learning how to manage your emotions. I don't think we're preparing our kids to face the kind of challenges that they are, and be willing to understand those big emotions that they're feeling, but also understand that there's help there for them. Yeah. And empowering them to reach out.
Yeah. How have you guys, if you have an opinion on this, what's your perception on stigma, frankly, and is that, are we subsiding from thinking there's a stigma there when we talk about mental health? I mean, there's been so much open dialogue, even from from the top down within our country, talking about the importance of mental health, but I still feel like there's a barrier there.
Yeah.
And so talk a little bit about that and sort of what you've seen.
I think there are some cultural barriers to it, and I think that has to be a continued conversation. And for individuals that are working in mental health to really recognize that and encourage and provide encouragement. But I also think, surprisingly, our young people are more open to discussion about mental health. Sometimes they even want to talk about that, but maybe the parents or the grandparents are still stuck.
Yeah.
We don't talk about our business outside of the house.
Right.
Or thinking that that's shameful, or not taking it seriously enough when a young person comes to talk with them.
Yeah. I saw this video the other day that kind of reminds me of that a little bit, where it was a woman about my age and mid-40s, and she was in essence oversimplifying, but talking about generational trauma.
Yes.
And how for trauma to go not necessarily undiagnosed but untreated, and then that carry over into the next generation, and it just has this kind of rippling effect, how that impacts a family, and how that impacts their trajectory in life and their ability to succeed financially.
Yes.
And all of these different things. It's insane to me. But she kind of simplified it, and she's like, my mom and dad wouldn't even think about going to therapy. Like, it wasn't even a question of it, at all. Her generation, my generation, we're leaning into it for sure. And that, and people are going to see therapists, openly talking about it. And the generation beneath me, that's like the number one thing they talk about, And so to think about, hopefully, this sort of transformational shift unfolding, where we're out of that mindset of, we can't talk about it.
Right.
And if we do, there's something wrong with you, and therefore it just lingers with you in ways that, frankly, can impact your professional careers and all sorts of different things. But I'm really hoping that we're sort of on this trajectory for change in that regard. And it seems to be a lot more of a vocal topic nowadays than it has been, which is good. I just hope that trend continues.
I do too. There's a really impactful study called Adverse Childhood Experiences. It's kind of like it's a simple test that you can take. And the higher number of experiences, those really traumatic ones, the worse your long-term outcomes are unless you get treatment. And we're talking about shorter life expectancy, the higher rates of mental health and substance use, poor job performance or ability to get good jobs, serious medical conditions. The list goes on and on.
Yeah.
So really thinking that out, in each person's space, without going to get treatment,
Yeah.
the outcomes can be so bad.
So bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we've, not to kind of get into it too heavily, but working with a local company here, right, who's developed a blood screening that helps you kind of just another tool in
Yes.
your toolbox, right? But iExpress Genes, that's based here in Huntsville, you know, they've developed a TII screening that allows you to identify, you know, potential changes in your genetic makeup that could be caused by trauma,
Yes.
which, you know, causes you to be more prone to long-term illness, such as inflammation and all sorts of different things. To have that kind of working knowledge going in when you decide to take that step and seek therapy or seek counsel is such a huge mountain to overcome. But also, too, something that I think would give a practitioner or direct primary care provider just way more insight into the scenario that they're working with, right? So I would love for you to just talk a little bit, not specifically about iExpress, but a little bit around the association of trauma and kind of, you know, long-term mental health a little bit. And I'll only speak on behalf of myself, but I think I represent a good portion of the population, potentially who has experienced some sort of trauma in their life, whether it be sexual trauma or physical trauma or emotional trauma for that matter. And I, like many other women and men, are just like, oh, it's no big deal. It's no big deal. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. You know, and I've got a good friend in my corner who's always telling me that it's not fine. And in fact, you need to face things head on, you know, and really deal with that. Well, those things manifest in other ways throughout our lifetime that we may not even realize. So I would love to just get kind of your opinion on that aspect of things. And it's not necessarily to say that, hey, everybody who has experienced trauma in our life needs to seek this. But the reality is that your body changes when you are constantly in that flight or fight state, as you mentioned earlier, and that's not how our bodies are supposed to be regulated, which alters, you know, how we're able to handle certain situations. The other thing I will say about that, and then would love your opinion on it, is that trauma, you know, I think when a lot of people think about one experiencing trauma, it's a devastating single event. You know, whether it be, you know, again, a sexual assault, or you were hijacked, or you were, you know, had the death of a child or something like that, you know, whatever it might be. Well, traumatic events can be long-term, where your body is constantly in that flight or fight because you're dealing with a stress that frankly is overwhelming, right? And I don't think a lot of people realize that and how that can have long-term effects on your body too. So just talk a little bit about that aspect of things.
So I think there sometimes is a misconception that, you know, mental health is separate from our physical health. And that's so wrong.
So wrong.
So incredibly wrong. That trauma response in our body, which really is activated by that fight or flight, where tons of hormones are released throughout your body. Cortisol, for example, which is a stress hormone. And it's like your body's like preparing itself to fight, right? So it's taking blood away from your vital organs to you know, to other areas so that you can run if you need to, or you can fight back. But when your body's in a constant state like that, it's really tearing your body down. And so thinking about that in kind of practice is a lot of times we develop skills to help us handle that, but they're not good skills. You know, drinking to numb it all, taking drugs to, you know, feel happy, which is causing other bad impacts on your body. So as a practitioner, you're looking at, you know, okay, we have trauma that we need to address, but we also have to learn new coping skills, but even recognize the damage that we're doing with those skills that we learned just to try to make it through. But when you think about, you know, going back to the generational trauma, I spoke with someone recently, a man of color who is living in the South, and really those micro traumas that happen every single day, where you walk into a store and people are kind of following you to make sure you're not going to take anything. Now, keep in mind, this is an amazing young man.
But still, it's,
but that is his experience every single day.
Right.
That adds up. over time, because your body can't relax. Your body is always looking, ready to defend you because you're not safe. You're not feeling safe. So there's so many types of self-care that people have to do. But people that have severe trauma and trauma over time, they have to work through that because it does have long-term consequences. Even my staff are experiencing the trauma of others vicariously, which is burnout is such a real thing.
I could only imagine, especially, as you were mentioning earlier, that you guys are in essence a 24/7 unit.
Yeah.
There's no off button for the services that you provide. I could not even imagine it being that the day to day, and then and I know you mentioned this earlier, but a challenge that you face too is your own self-care.
Oh, yes.
Right? Which is just so it's like you're seeing it and you're preaching it and you're helping to instill it. But man, have you got to take a conscious effort to just stop and pause and breathe once in a while, which I would imagine is way easier said than done. But
oh, yeah.
Yeah. So how do your employees kind of handle that, and how does WellStone address that?
Yeah, I think at least in our program, we really have to be a team and be willing to admit, okay, I'm feeling overwhelmed, and tag out.
Yeah.
It can be really tough, and it seems like at times there's waves of individuals that need help that have been through so much, and it's just almost everyone on the unit is discouraged or just so overwhelmed with the terrible experiences that people are going through and the barriers that they're facing when they leave us.
Yeah.
Even though we can help them while they're here with us, they might be having to go back to a homeless camp or going back to a place where they don't have anyone that loves them and supports them.
Yeah. Or going back to an environment where they're with the person who is causing that flight or fight, right?
Yes.
If you're in an abusive relationship or, I couldn't even imagine that.
Yeah. Those times are really tough. And I think we are very intentional about celebrating the successes and celebrating even when people make just a little incremental gain. Sometimes that's the biggest deal out of the day. But I do have to be mindful that this can just be so overwhelming for those that are in place to help others.
Yeah, I can imagine that. So what would you say, coming from your perspective, what are some sort of, and I don't mean generalized to undermine the importance of them, but like general tips that one can do to kind of stay on top of those types of things? And again, like whether you have a history of some trauma in your life or you don't, what's sort of that like mental cleanup, if you will? I think of like the restocking stuff, right? What are some of the things that, individuals can just do on a regular basis, almost to check in with themselves, in a way?
Sometimes you have to think about your thinking. Yeah. And I know it sounds weird,
no,
but
it doesn't sound weird.
You're really like examining your thoughts, and if all your thoughts during the day are tilted towards the negative, or you can't experience things that you used to really enjoy, you're not seeing the joy in those everyday little experiences anymore, something's probably wrong. Your cup's probably empty.
Yeah.
But I think it's also important to know what works for you, what's going to recharge your engine, what's going to fill your cup back up, and it's going to be different for everybody.
Yeah.
But when you are feeling so overwhelmed and there's no downtime for you, your brain just won't stop, you're probably needing to take some time and recharge.
Yeah. What would you say some of the common things that you do to refill your cup? What works for you?
Me?
Yeah.
A brain dump.
Okay. Like you get it out on paper? Or
I
do. You voice it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like sometimes I find myself, I have so many responsibilities, and I recognize, oh my I'm forgetting about this, that, or the other. So just every little thought that comes in my mind, I'm going to give myself 10 minutes at the end of work before I walk out of the building.
Okay.
Just going to write it all down.
Yeah.
Not like journaling, just like bullets, short little sentences of things that I'm worried about, things that I need to think more about, something I want to get to. And then I give myself permission to leave that right there on my desk until the next day when I come back into work.
That's got to be hard.
It is.
Yeah, to leave things behind, I would imagine.
It is, but part of that technique is then if it comes back up, reminding yourself, Paula, you wrote that down. You're gonna think about that tomorrow.
Yeah.
And then really being in the moment is tough. We're all so tied to these dang phones, but setting it down, and just experiencing where you're at. If you're outside in nature, which is one of my favorite things, making sure that you put that phone away, because it's too tempting to take pictures.
Yeah.
And then check your text messages or you know, whatever. It's a slippery slope.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. That's good. I think I love are you a fan of journaling? Have you gotten into journaling at all?
I like creative journaling with all the different pen colors. That is just like my thing. I love it. So
I love that. And you can tell you have that creative side to you. Like I could see that. Journaling has been something that was introduced to me not that long ago. And I always used to write when I was younger, but I didn't intentionally journal.
Yeah.
Where I was prompting myself to ask those questions and to pay attention to your thinking. Just like you said, I love that. Because it's really easy for us just to get in this vicious cycle, especially of the dialogue that's happening in your own mind. And I think it's really easy to you almost like, you know, tone it out, but it's still happening. And you just get so used to it, I think, that you don't even realize it, you know.
Yeah.
And journaling has been such a huge help for me. I've shared that with a lot of people, where just, you know, how is your headspace today, and what's on your mind, and what's, you know, and I find that just getting things out of my head too and on paper really, really helps. You know, we work really closely here at Flourish with Rachel Sullivan, who's with Solid Ground Counseling Center, and she does a lot of mental health workshops for our team, and it's been phenomenal to work with. And she's really helped us kind of decipher, like, okay, what is this voice saying versus what this voice is saying, and how do you decipher the difference between whether it's this or it's that, or, you know, and really just kind of giving you the tools a little bit to kind of understand, you know, where the mind is at and how you handle it. But it's just a fascinating thing. But I think that's important. You've got to make time for yourself and give yourself permission to really slow down. And especially as, you know, being a mom and being a working mom, and even back when you were getting your master's degree and caring for the home by yourself and all of these things, it's a really hard thing to do. And I think probably naturally as women, we put guilt on ourselves for taking a break.
We do.
Because it's like, why in the world would you think to do that when the dishwasher needs to be emptied, or the...
Right. I mean, you have to be like, super mom, right? And everybody on Facebook has the most beautiful house and the most beautiful family, and everybody's dressed perfectly. So there's a lot
Which
of
is
guilt.
so not reality.
Yeah, it's not.
Like, no.
So I think giving yourself permission to say, I'm exhausted, I'm not doing those dishes right now.
Right. And it's going to be just fine. Like, they're not going anywhere.
The world is not going to end.
Right. But it's hard to do that, though. It's really hard. And I think that comparison is something that I think will be the death of you. I mean, it
really is.
Because if you just get consumed in that, then you're constantly, well, I should be doing this, or you know, which is just, it'll drive you nuts, and it's just not worth it.
And the overuse of social media is tied to depression.
Yes. Yeah. So I was looking at this, and I just had a couple of stats here, which just kind of blew my mind. But it said nearly half of American teenagers report being online constantly, nearly half, with platforms like YouTube, TikTok, and Snapchat being the most frequented. And then social media usage within high school students is linked, obviously, to poorer mental health outcomes. 41% of teens with the highest use rate their mental health as poor or very poor. So almost half of high school students who consume social media are saying that their mental health is either poor or very poor.
Yeah.
Which is just, if you don't need a bigger stat, you know, it's like, it's right there.
It is.
It is right there. So, I mean, not to bring it full circle a little bit, but I mean, as parents, we have a responsibility, right? And I'm, you know, trust me, I'm in the same boat where it is so hard. It is so hard. And it's even harder once you institute something and then you try to pull it back. You know, it's like, whoo, woo, watch out for that.
There's a lot of pushback.
A lot of pushback. And, my husband and I are constantly in discussion around, we don't understand how we can't have greater control over a smart device. It's just not designed that way. It's really, really not. I mean, regardless of what kind of plan you have, which is why I loved Kristen's suggestion, where get a completely different phone altogether. It still looks like a smartphone, but it's not. Anyways, but it makes it really, really hard. Really, really hard.
It is.
And kids will tell little white lies, and then those white lies become really comfortable to tell, and they don't get caught, and so that just becomes the norm. And before you know it, you think everything is cool, and then it's not, and it's just really scary.
It is.
So.
And it's challenging because a lot of times that is their social experience, is texting with their friends or playing a game with their friends, and where we used to have sleepovers and you knew their kids more. We're getting away from that more, and their interaction is all on digital.
Yeah, which is just crazy. We need to get them out in sports and take the phones away. Yeah. Well, so what's next for you and the team at WellStone? I know you guys have just recently, the Pediatric Center was just recently opened, which is absolutely beautiful. Congratulations.
Thank
What
you.
a huge endeavor that is. So talk a little bit about kind of that and what's next for you guys at WellStone.
Goodness, we're so excited to bring this pediatric unit. We're helping kids 12 to 18 right now who are in crisis, and that looks different for every young person who needs us, all the way from suicidal thoughts, a lot, self-harm, all the way up to the first episode of having really severe mental health psychosis. So, but I think again, it's trying to make this that transformative experience. Our medical director talks about it, that you're learning about mental health without realizing you actually are, because we're going to try to make it a fun experience and a relaxed, and but most of all, that they feel safe while they're with us. Really invested in making sure that all of my staff, employees, who are amazing, by the way, but we're building that culture where we're so happy to see someone walk in the door, because first of all, they were really brave to do that, because that's a scary thing.
100%.
To me, it's always humbling when someone is willing to talk to me about things that are hard to talk about. But I want my staff to show that care and that love towards people, because sometimes we're all they have. And sometimes this is the only opportunity. If we get it wrong, they might not seek help again. So I think we're really invested in making sure we do this right, and do it with love and with care, but also, of course, with all the evidence-based practices that we need to try to help the individuals get better.
Yeah, that's so exciting. So will you guys be providing, I'm sure there will, you guys do a great job of education. That's a big piece of it, right? But to parents in this area to know that that facility is available to them.
Yes.
So when would be the time to call WellStone for crisis support as it relates to their child?
Any question whatsoever. If you have a question, just call.
Okay.
Someone's going to speak with you. 988, if you're calling from a 256 area code, that's a WellStone therapist that's answering the phone.
24/7, someone's available? That's awesome.
I say err on the side of caution. Just call and ask. And we're willing to be there to help. 988 can launch our mobile crisis teams, so they can get help to you that you need. And our crisis center is 24/7.
And not to put down any hospitals in our area, but you guys are better equipped to handle scenarios like that, right? When you think that there is a mental health crisis there. Would you say?
I think you can get in quicker, of course. If you're really needing hospitalization for a young person, there's no other beds in Madison County, so you're having to leave the county and send your child sometimes great distances away, sometimes even out of state. So for us to be able to provide that and keep the family, which is their support system, closer to
Absolutely.
them,
Yeah.
so they can be a part of treatment, I think
That's
is
huge.
the best.
That is huge. That way you can be there for them.
Yeah.
You know, that's a big deal. Big deal. Well, congratulations.
Thank
What an
you.
amazing thing to have here in our own backyard to take advantage of.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I would love to say that I hope I never see you there, but I'm really, really glad that it's here, right? Because of just those moments that are going to happen. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And I'm so glad to see that our community is invested in that resource. It's just
Yeah.
awesome. So
And me being a mom, I was like, you know, I can't believe we don't have beds for our kids
it's
here.
insane. I don't know
Yeah.
that a lot of people are even aware of that,
Right.
frankly. I mean, that's mind-boggling to me. So now we've got a resource here to help with that,
Yeah.
which is just amazing. So, Paula, thank you so much for sharing your story and talking a little bit about what you're doing at WellStone and what a phenomenal organization here that we're just so grateful to have in our community. And you know, and it's growing with our community, right? And I'm so
is.
glad to see that you know, the higher ups are recognizing that, you know, and really putting their money where we need it. So we just look forward to everything that you guys will be taking, you know, being involved in over the next couple of years, and we'll be cheering you on from the sidelines. So
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you for having me.
Of course, you're welcome. See you guys next time.